The worst diet myth for reversing insulin resistance is eating very low carb. They show you a graph like this, where carbs are the worst offenders for spiking insulin after a meal, so the simple solution is to cut carbs, right? Wrong. This is overly simplified thinking. Findings from controlled lab settings are being recommended without taking into account the complexity of our body's reaction to the messy reality of how we actually eat when not participating in a controlled research study. By the end of this video, you will be able to separate lab results from real-life results and know the 3 steps to reversing your insulin resistance. First, to understand why this is a myth, you need to understand how insulin resistance happens. One of the nutrients that food gets broken down into is glucose, which your organs need for functioning. Insulin is what shuttles the glucose from your bloodstream into your organs. And there is a specific amount or threshold of insulin that your organs need to detect for them to open up and absorb glucose. Now, if you overeat, a higher amount of glucose floods your bloodstream, and thus a higher amount of insulin is needed to shuttle it all into your organs. Over time, as overeating keeps happening, your organs start expecting a higher threshold of insulin amount to be met before they will open up to accept glucose. This is a problem because you won't hit that higher threshold every time you eat, which leaves too much glucose in your bloodstream. So your liver clears it all up by converting it into fat. Fat not only stores energy, but also makes hormones and other substances that causes chronic inflammation, which in turn can push the insulin threshold even higher, making this whole cycle worse and worse over time. This is insulin resistance. Now, the reason people say to cut carbs to reverse insulin resistance is because carbs break down mostly into glucose, and thus need more insulin to be cleared up than proteins or fats. This is why carbs as a whole tend to be higher on the glycemic index, an index that rates foods by how much glucose it releases into the bloodstream. But the glycemic index was developed in a lab setting based on eating 50-gram carbs alone in a fasted state. On a daily basis, do you eat your meals like that? I bet you normally don't only eat carbs, but mix it up with other food groups like proteins and fats. And guess what? When you mix it up like that, the glucose spike is smaller, and correspondingly, the insulin spike needed to clear it up is smaller. For example, potatoes are high glycemic index food, but if you combine them with salmon and broccoli, the glycemic index of this meal is lower than eating potatoes alone. Similarly, some of the low-carb proponents will tell you to cut out high net carb fruits like orange. But oranges also contain a lot of fiber, which again creates a smaller glucose and insulin spike. But guess what do we consume by itself without adding protein or fiber? All the refined foods, soda, energy drinks, desserts, refined grains, and so on. This is the stuff we pound down in large volumes in one go, especially because a lot of junk foods are combinations of high carbs and high fats, which feel super palatable to our body, so we find it hard to stop. In fact, in nature, foods that are both high carb and high fat are rare. Breast milk is one of a small handful of examples. Our bodies don't know how to deal with this modern invention of high carbs and high fat foods. Now, since junk and sweets are all mainly sugar, they're categorized under carbs, which leads to the overly simplified thinking of cut out all carbs. But as you can see, the problem isn't with all carbs. It's only the carbs we eat in large volumes without mixing it with whole foods that is junk and sweets. The second argument that proponents of low carb make is that there are research studies which show low carb causes improvement in insulin resistance. Note that in the studies where low carb caused improvement in insulin resistance, the low carb group also lost a lot of weight. So is it low carb that caused improved insulin resistance or the weight loss? As Yale Diabetes Center Dr. Silvio Inzucchi says in this Washington Post article, obesity leads to insulin resistance with less evidence for a relationship in the other direction. Now, if you're thinking, if low carb causes more weight loss, which then reverses insulin resistance, I should do low carb anyway, then pause and ask yourself, is 50 grams or less carbs per day sustainable for you for life? Can you stick to minimal bread, pasta, ice cream forever? If you lose weight in a way that's unsustainable, you have never practiced how to do the sustainable thing, so you don't know how to maintain. You will regain what you lost, and then what's the point? So what should you do to reverse insulin resistance? First, cut back on refined carbs. Aim for 80% of your calories to come from whole foods, and the remaining 20% can be from junk or sweets. Watch this video to determine your target calories. So for example, if your target calorie should be 1500 per day on average, then 80% or 1200 calories should be from whole foods, while the remaining 300 calories per day on average can be from junk or sweet. Second, eat mainly when hungry and reduce eating due to cravings. Hunger is a physically painful sensation in your abdomen that you can point to, and to assuage it, you'd be open to eating anything, while craving is a mental want for a specific food. It is usually triggered by stress, boredom, procrastination, and other emotional reasons. We made a whole video on strategies for dealing with cravings. And last, add some exercise. Here is a meta-analysis of studies which found that cardio in particular decreases insulin resistance. That said, resistance training is generally less researched than cardio, so there isn't enough data to accurately gauge how much resistance training helps. That said, most of us walk as part of our daily routine, which is cardio. And if you're considering adding formal cardio, then you want to check out this video on the worst cardio mistake everyone makes. Finally, if you want to work with me to reverse your insulin resistance by losing fat, then check out the free sneak peek into my Badass Body Boss program in the description and comments below. And always remember, you can do it.